Right, Munyumba. Munyumba, the changes at the helm of central banking in Zambia have been trending all weekend. From your end, did you see this coming? Were there any underlying currents that we did not hear about or feel over the past, say, 1 year? Or was it just a case of underperformance?
Okay, well, I think the first thing I'll put down is obviously it's uncomfortable to the whole industry that a president can just summarily hire and fire a central bank governor. I think that's discomforting to anyone. But this is not a new thing. I think we can go back to Dr. Fundanga's dismissal that showed us exactly how much power a president has to just summarily dismiss a central bank governor. So I think if we're going to talk about central bank independence, let's backtrack there and deal with the laws that give the president the power to do that, rather than say, how can this happen? Let's look at the actual things. And obviously, the code I always say is never give a politician powers you don't want him to use. And that's the first stance that I would put out. Now, if I'm looking at how this dismissal happened, from my perspective, I've been seeing this happening since last year. And it's due to the low subscriptions on bonds. The government has been relying on bond subscriptions to try and maybe fill up the coffers where the economy has been declining. Remember that we have 8 straight quarters of economic growth decline that's been happening in Zambia. So that means that, and it actually ended last year with almost zero economic growth. So because of that, you have a situation where you really have been under pressure, trying to make sure that you get your money out the bond market, but you're not getting anything. And the only good auctions that have been happening have been where banks are rolling over. They're rolling over bonds from their inventory. And also because bank participation is also struggling. I mean, he's had countless meetings with the banks trying to get them to participate. And that's been the issue. So the central thing you really have to look at with Dr. Kaya's dismissal comes down to the performance of the bond market.
Right. Now, Munyumba, a central bank governor's appointment or disappointment attracts not only local scrutiny, but also international scrutiny, especially from offshore players or investors. The IMF and World Bank, and in most cases, even rating agencies, might raise eyebrows. It further has a direct bearing on how these stakeholders then relate to the country. With the latest development in Zambia, what risks is Zambia facing in the short to medium term?
Okay, the first thing, short to medium term, obviously, there's going to be a little spike, especially in the currency. Obviously, I take a look at what's happening right now from a currency perspective. That's obviously a little bit of a short-term risk, but that was already happening. Let me not put the situation right there and say the currency is gonna go on the run. It's already on the run. It got to 19 on his watch. Remember that when Dr. Kaya came into power, the kwacha was 7. Just remember that. That's how bad things have gotten up to now. The risk that we do stand to face, obviously, is where we stand in negotiations. Obviously, the new governor has to now try and reestablish negotiations and has to reestablish rapport as well. And obviously, it puts them on a back foot for that. The other thing, obviously, I would say is that I think everyone knew this was the problem, that the powers were there to kind of just push and pull someone immediately. The most important thing I would say is this: let's not hamper on who's at the helm of the central bank. Let's look at another more important thing that we need to look at. Zambia is struggling from bad statistics of where it needs to be on monetary policy. Our current accounts are struggling. Our forex reserves are struggling. And our fiscal deficits are literally just getting worse and worse. And then finally, to all of this, our economy is not growing. So if you have all this information operating poorly, no matter who the governor is, nobody's going to lend you money. That's just the reality of the game. Nobody's going to invest in a bank in a country where those metrics are not being met well.
Right, Munyumba, you have mentioned some of the issues that I have in my next question. So looking at the current state of affairs, the Zambian kwacha is dipping. Our reserves have depleted to as low as 1.5 months of import cover. We have been quoting the IMF for a bailout package of about $1.5 billion for past 2 years. And now we have applied to the IMF for a rapid credit facility to stimulate the economy during the COVID-19 pandemic. Importantly, we are 11.5 months to the next elections, Munyumba. What would you say about the timing of this development at the central bank, especially that there are some assertions in society that are saying the government wants to start printing money to help with campaigns and hence appointing someone who is a pro-government governor?
Well, look, if you're talking about printing, let's also bear in mind that this year, money supply is already up 30% this year, if you're actually already looking. So there's been printing that's been going on in Zambia to cover for the fact that revenues are short and bonds haven't performed as well. So where has the money had to come from? They pretty much have had to knock out the press, the printing press, if they've had to try and raise the money. Looking at speculations in society, I think the safest thing is not to try and engage in as much speculation as possible. But I can tell you this: I've never seen the IMF engage in issuing any bailouts or any support in an election year. They try and stay away from giving money during an election year because they don't want to put their thumb on their scale politically. So it's highly unlikely we'll even get a bailout before the election. So that's one thing as well. And people are already just focusing on the metrics. Nobody's really going to try and help out with the metrics. Now, having a pro-government governor, look, you're being watched. If anything that we've learned this year, Zambia is being watched thoroughly. We're being looked at intensely. I don't think this would be the time to start engaging in anything of such a nature because the level of scrutiny that is currently on Zambia, even before the firing of Dr. Kaya, is at a severely intense point that I don't think anyone would try and risk that. And if they did, it would just really backfire on us horribly.
Munyumba, just before I let you go, if you were to be appointed governor today, Munyumba, in view of the state of affairs as we have discussed in the previous question, what would be the first 5 things you would do, Munyumba?
The if I ruled the world question.
Yeah.
I would put it this way. The agenda I would put forward if I was sitting at the helm of that
I'll
position.
give you 5, Munyumba, so be careful. 5.
5.
Yeah.
Okay, 5. It's just a 5-point agenda. I'm not going that far.
Yeah.
Would be something called an acceleration and liberalization principle. So the first thing I would do is indigenize banking. The biggest problem we have is that all of our banks are outside. So all the decisions of how much we can invest are coming from outside. Indigenization just means open up the market to as many local players by giving lower tiers of licensing. Disaggregation. Take the central bank and try and move it out into each province so that you can set up village banking systems within the bank itself to pull that money from our cultural services. Community banks as well. You need as many community banks so that you can actually start getting those banking services. So you need lower tier licenses that can get players in. Digitization. In the future, there's not going to be any banks. So this thing of also trying to promote as much banking as possible, there's going to be apps. That Alipay app, that Paytm app, that's the future of banking. So let's get ahead of that and start working on app-based banking, digital banking. Let's not dismiss the digital coins that the previous people have dismissed. Incentivizing people to try and lend to small businesses. One of the reasons why banks will tell you they don't lend is because the risk is too high. So you kind of have to offset it with a tax incentive so that they can lend and they can open up the credit markets to the households and the smaller business as well. Regulatory consolidation, bring as much of the financial services regulators together instead of having these separate regulators. And finally, and most importantly, gold basing. I know that everyone takes this as a joke, but you've got to understand the way that US dollar is performing right now and the way things are happening around the world, it would be safe to now start creating a gold environment for the Zambian kwacha to save and preserve the Zambian kwacha. It can actually help the currency, by the way, if we actually have gold sitting at the central bank instead of exporting every inch of it, because that's what makes our currency weak.
Munyumba, all the best with that governor appointment in future. Have a good evening.